For 12,500 years, a wall of paintings stretching nearly 8 miles across remote Colombian cliffs sat completely sealed off from the outside world, not behind a locked door, but behind something far more effective: pure geography, dense jungle, and, for the last 60 years, an active war zone controlled by armed guerrilla forces that made the area too dangerous for any outsider to even attempt reaching it. When archaeologists finally got permission to enter in 2017, following a historic peace agreement that reopened the region for the first time in decades, what they found on those cliff walls shouldn't have been possible according to everything textbooks said about the Amazon: extinct Ice Age giants, a civilization nobody knew existed. The Amazon rainforest covers an area roughly the size of the continental United States, and for most of modern history, that scale worked directly against archaeologists rather than for them. Dense canopy cover means satellite imagery. No matter how advanced, simply cannot see the ground beneath it. Walking survey teams face genuinely brutal conditions, impassable terrain, disease, extreme heat, and, in many regions, active armed conflict that has made large sections of the Amazon basin functionally off-limits to researchers for generations. The result is a genuinely remarkable, uncomfortable fact that most people never think about. We have, in real, measurable terms, mapped less of the Amazon rainforest floor in fine detail than we have mapped the surface of the moon. That is not an exaggeration designed for a video hook. It is a direct, repeated observation made by archaeologists actively working in the region, describing the practical reality of trying to study a landscape that actively resists being studied. For over a century, that blind spot fueled legend after legend. Spanish conquistadors chased rumors of El Dorado, a mythical city of gold, deep into the forest, and many of them never returned. As recently as the 1920s, the British explorer Percy Fawcett vanished into the Amazon searching for what he called the lost city of Z, disappearing so completely that his fate remains formally unresolved to this day. For most of the 20th century, mainstream archaeology treated these vanishing acts as cautionary tales confirming a simple, comfortable assumption. There was nothing large or organized enough hiding in the Amazon to justify the risk of looking for it. The standard academic model held that the Amazon basin, throughout prehistory, supported only small, scattered nomadic hunter-gatherer groups, populations too thin and too mobile to ever build anything resembling cities, monuments, or complex organized societies. That assumption held for decades, not because nobody wanted to find evidence to the contrary, but because the technology required to actually look beneath the canopy simply didn't exist yet. The tool that finally broke that blind spot open is called LIDAR, and understanding exactly how it works matters, because it's the single piece of technology responsible for essentially every major Amazon archaeological breakthrough of the last several years. LIDAR stands for light detection and ranging, and the basic concept is something close to sonar, but built from light instead of sound. An aircraft flies over the forest carrying an instrument that fires billions of individual laser pulses directly down at the ground below. The overwhelming majority of those pulses strike leaves, branches, and the dense upper canopy and never make it any further. But a small percentage, often just a tiny fraction of a percent, slip through natural gaps in the foliage and reach all the way down to the forest floor, bouncing back up to the sensor. By precisely timing how long each individual pulse takes to return, and by firing enough billions of pulses to build up a genuinely dense data set, researchers can construct an extraordinarily detailed three-dimensional model of the ground itself. A computer algorithm then does something that sounds almost like a magic trick, but is really just careful data filtering. It mathematically strips away every laser return that bounced off vegetation, leaving only the returns that touched bare earth. What's left, displayed on a screen, is the forest floor rendered as if every single tree had simply been deleted. Archaeologists studying this kind of data have described the moment of seeing a LIDAR scan resolve for the first time as genuinely unlike anything else in their careers. Watching centuries of accumulated forest simply disappear from the screen to reveal whatever has been sitting underneath it the entire time. This is the exact technology that took archaeologist and paleoanthropologist Ella Al-Shamahi into the Amazon in late 2019, and her involvement is worth establishing clearly, because she's a genuinely credentialed, serious researcher, not a television personality manufactured for dramatic effect. Al-Shamahi is a National Geographic explorer and evolutionary biologist whose academic background centers on Neanderthal evolution, and whose broader career has involved leading genuinely dangerous fieldwork expeditions into conflict zones across Yemen, Iraq, Nagorno-Karabakh, and Somaliland, specifically searching for Paleolithic cave sites and evidence of early human migration routes that most researchers consider too physically risky to attempt. In late 2019, she led a film crew and a team of archaeologists across Colombia, Brazil, Bolivia, and Peru, documenting an active, ongoing wave of LIDAR-driven discoveries, reshaping how researchers understand the ancient Amazon. That expedition became the Channel 4 documentary series Jungle Mystery, Lost Kingdoms of the Amazon. which first aired in December 2020. And it's the real, verified expedition that sits at the center of what's often exaggerated online into far more sensational, invented territory. What Al-Shamahi's team and the broader community of Amazon-focused archaeologists working around the same period actually documented is genuinely remarkable without needing any embellishment at all. Perhaps the single most significant recent Amazon LIDAR discovery comes from Ecuador's Upano Valley, in the eastern foothills of the Andes, where researchers led by Stephen Rostaing, director of research at the French National Center for Scientific Research, used LIDAR surveys commissioned by the Ecuadorian government to uncover an extensive network of ancient urban centers dating back nearly 3,000 years. This wasn't a scattering of huts. The scans revealed a genuinely sophisticated network of roads, elevated platforms, organized residential and ceremonial structures, and agricultural terracing connected across the landscape by a deliberate, planned infrastructure network. Rostaing, who had physically walked portions of this exact terrain many times over the course of his career without ever fully grasping its scale, described the LIDAR data as giving him an entirely new view of land he thought he already knew intimately, explaining that, on foot, the trees are simply in the way, making it genuinely difficult to perceive what's actually hidden beneath them. The findings, published in the peer-reviewed journal Science, represent, according to the research team, the oldest and largest urban settlement network yet identified in the Amazon basin, a finding that directly contradicts the old academic assumption that organized, city-scale settlement simply wasn't possible in this environment. Bolivia produced a comparably significant discovery around the same broader period, when LIDAR surveys across the Llanos de Mojos region revealed evidence connected to the ancient Casarabi culture, uncovering a dense network of settlements linked by raised causeways, reservoirs, and organized agricultural infrastructure. Evidence published in the journal Nature that similarly forced a serious reconsideration of just how large, organized, and interconnected pre-Columbian Amazonian societies actually were. Taken together, these findings, produced by entirely separate research teams working in different countries using the same core LIDAR technology, have begun assembling a genuinely different picture of the ancient Amazon than the one most people were taught in school. Not an empty, thinly populated wilderness, occasionally passed through by small nomadic bands, but a landscape that, in specific regions and specific periods, supported organized, engineered, densely connected human settlement on a scale nobody seriously entertained as recently as 15 years ago. Now we arrive at the discovery that most directly connects to the idea of something sealed away and finally opened. And this is where the story becomes genuinely, verifiably extraordinary, because it doesn't require a single invented detail to earn that description. Deep in the Colombian department of Guaviare sits a remote sandstone plateau formation known as Serrania de la Lindosa. For most of the 20th century and well into the 21st, this specific region sat inside territory controlled by FARC guerrilla forces, a decades-long armed conflict that made serious, sustained archaeological fieldwork in the area genuinely dangerous, and in practical terms, largely impossible for outside researchers. That changed following Colombia's landmark 2016 peace agreement, which finally opened previously inaccessible conflict zones to research access for the first time in a generation. In 2017, a joint team of British and Colombian archaeologists, working with researchers from the University of Exeter, moved into the region specifically to survey what these newly accessible cliffs might contain. What they found took years of careful documentation before the world saw it, with the discovery finally revealed publicly in December 2020, timed directly alongside the release of Al-Shamahi's Channel 4 documentary series. The scale of what they documented is genuinely difficult to overstate, honestly, without needing any exaggeration at all. Stretching across nearly 8 miles, roughly 13 kilometers, of cliff face, spread across 3 distinct rock shelters, researchers identified tens of thousands of individual paintings, rendered in red ochre, a natural iron oxide pigment that has survived on these exposed rock surfaces for well over 10,000 years. Archaeologist Mark Robinson of the University of Exeter, part of the research team, described descending from the Bogota Plateau into the thick vegetation of the Amazon forest, specifically to observe this outcrop of painted rock, depicting scenes of people dancing, hunting, and what appear to be ritual gatherings. The site was formally dubbed the Sistine Chapel of the Ancients by the researchers themselves, a comparison meant to convey both the sheer visual density of the imagery and its likely cultural significance to the people who created it, rather than pure marketing language invented afterward by journalists covering the story. Here's the detail that genuinely earns the comparison to something that shouldn't exist, and it's entirely real, entirely peer-reviewed, and entirely verifiable. Radiocarbon dating and stylistic analysis place significant portions of this rock art between roughly 11,800 and 12,600 years old, meaning it was created right at the tail end of the last ice age. precisely as the planet was warming and the modern Amazon rainforest, as we would recognize it today, was still actively taking shape around the artists creating these images. And the paintings themselves depict something genuinely striking. Alongside recognizable modern Amazonian animals like tapirs, alligators, turtles, fish, and birds, the murals include detailed depictions of unmistakably Ice Age megafauna, species that had already gone completely extinct by the time recorded human history in this region begins, giant sloths rendered at a scale that clearly distinguishes them from any living Amazonian animal. Gomphotheres, an extinct elephant-like relative of the mastodon, depicted with visible trunks, ancient camelid species and Ice Age horses, animals that vanished from South America entirely by the end of the Pleistocene. According to the lead researchers, including archaeologist Jose Iriarte, this represents a direct physical documentation of a genuinely narrow window in time when early human inhabitants of the western Amazon lived alongside, hunted, and apparently held enough cultural significance around these massive Ice Age creatures to deliberately paint them onto rock walls that would survive for over 12,000 years afterward. It's genuinely important, in the interest of giving this story its full, accurate context, to include something most viral retellings of this discovery conveniently leave out entirely. Not every archaeologist agrees the Ice Age interpretation is definitively correct, and that scholarly disagreement is itself part of the honest scientific record here. Fernando Urbina and Jorge Peña, archaeologists at the Universidad Nacional de Colombia, have published research directly challenging aspects of the Ice Age megafauna interpretation, arguing that certain figures identified as ancient camelids and horses may actually represent animals introduced to South America by European colonizers after 1492, since horses were not native to the Americas until the Spanish brought them across the Atlantic. Separately, researchers Trujillo Tellez and colleagues have raised a more direct physical objection, arguing that the paintings appear too well preserved in terms of pigment clarity and surface condition to plausibly be as old as the 12,000-year dating suggests, and specifically contest the identification of the site's most famous giant sloth figure, proposing it may instead depict a capybara, a much smaller still-living rodent species common throughout the region today. The original research team, including Iriarte and Robinson, has published direct rebuttals to these specific criticisms, defending both the dating methodology and the anatomical case for the megafauna identifications, and the debate remains genuinely active and unresolved within the academic literature as of the most recent published exchanges. This is worth including honestly rather than glossing over, because a real scientific discovery, unlike a fabricated one, comes with exactly this kind of legitimate, ongoing scholarly disagreement rather than a single, neat, unchallenged conclusion. What both sides of that academic debate do agree on, regardless of the precise age of every individual figure, is that Serrania de la Lindosa represents an archaeological site of major significance, one that had remained functionally sealed away from serious study for the better part of a century, not through any deliberate ancient design, but through the far more mundane, and in some ways more genuinely dramatic, combination of extreme remoteness and decades of armed conflict. Getting to the site today still requires a lengthy, physically demanding journey. A multi-hour drive from Siribikhet National Park, followed by a difficult hike through dense terrain to actually reach the painted cliffs. In 2018, the Colombian government formally declared Serrania de la Lindosa a protected archaeological site, a designation intended to preserve the murals while researchers continue the almost unimaginably slow work of properly documenting everything painted across that 8-mile stretch of rock. A task that the lead researchers themselves have described as likely to take multiple generations of continued study to fully complete, given that, according to team members, every new section of cliff they examine reveals yet another previously undocumented wall of paintings. There's a genuinely striking detail buried inside the mural content itself that deserves specific attention, separate from the megafauna debate, because it reveals something concrete about how these ancient artists actually worked. Alongside the animal imagery, researchers documented human figures depicted wearing masks, engaged in what appear to be ritual dances, and, notably, human figures shown suspended or leaping from constructed wooden towers. The research team's working interpretation is that these depicted towers may explain a genuinely practical mystery: how ancient artists managed to paint detailed imagery at heights well above what an unaided human standing on the ground could physically reach on these tall cliff faces. That's a small, grounded, entirely unglamorous archaeological inference, exactly the kind of careful, evidence-based reasoning that characterizes legitimate research, standing in useful contrast to the kind of unsupported dramatic speculation, sealed doorways, hidden vaults, ancient technology that tends to accumulate around genuinely exciting discoveries once they spread across the internet. Consider now what these findings, taken together across multiple independent research efforts in Ecuador, Bolivia, and Colombia, actually mean for how historians and archaeologists currently understand the deep human history of the Amazon basin, because the honest scientific implications here are already substantial without requiring a single invented embellishment. The old academic consensus, that the Amazon supported only small, scattered nomadic populations incapable of complex social organization, has been directly and repeatedly contradicted by physical, peer-reviewed evidence over the course of the last several years. The Upano Valley findings demonstrate organized urban infrastructure predating comparable European settlements by centuries. The Casarabe culture findings in Bolivia demonstrate sophisticated, interconnected engineering across a wide landscape. And the Serrania de la Lindosa murals demonstrate that human beings were present in the western Amazon, observing and apparently culturally engaging with now extinct Ice Age megafauna thousands of years earlier than most general historical narratives about South American settlement typically account for. None of these findings, individually or combined, requires anything beyond conventional, well-supported archaeological science to explain. What they collectively demonstrate is simply that the tools available to study this specific landscape have, for the vast majority of human history, been genuinely inadequate to the task. Not that nothing significant was ever there to find. It's worth being equally honest about the significant limits of what has actually been confirmed, because responsible reporting on ongoing archaeological research means resisting the temptation to round genuine uncertainty up into settled fact. No researcher working on any of these sites, Al-Shamahi included, has published or claimed to have discovered anything resembling a sealed underground chamber, a bone-constructed cathedral, a preserved seed vault, or physical evidence of continent-spanning trade in materials like obsidian connected to sites this specific. Those elements belong to a separate, considerably more sensationalized genre of online content that borrows real, verified discoveries, the LIDAR technology, Al-Shamahi's actual expedition, the genuine Ice Age rock art, and grafts entirely invented details onto them for dramatic effect. The real story doesn't need that grafting to be worth telling. A remote stretch of cliff face, sealed away from serious study for the better part of a century by war and geography, open to researchers for the first time only after a historic peace agreement, revealing 12,000-year-old evidence of human beings living alongside animals that no person alive today has ever seen outside of a museum reconstruction, is already a genuinely remarkable story on its own honest terms. Step back and look at the complete, accurate shape of what's actually been established here, because it holds together as a legitimately significant scientific narrative without needing any exaggeration layered on top of it. A technology originally developed for entirely unrelated applications, converted into archaeology's single most transformative modern tool, has spent the last several years systematically stripping away the forest canopy that has hidden the ancient Amazon from serious study for the entirety of recorded history. That technology has already confirmed organized urban settlement in Ecuador dating back nearly 3,000 years, interconnected engineered infrastructure across Bolivia, and in Colombia, brought researchers face to face with a genuinely extraordinary 8-mile wall of Ice Age rock art, sealed away from the outside world for over a century by dense jungle and armed conflict, only finally opened to careful documentation following a hard-won peace agreement in 2016. The murals themselves, whatever the final resolution of the ongoing academic dating debate turns out to be, represent one of the most significant rock art discoveries made anywhere in the world during the last several decades, a direct physical record left behind by some of the very first human beings to ever set foot in the western Amazon. Every individual piece of this holds up under genuine scholarly scrutiny. The LIDAR technology and its documented capabilities are well-established engineering, not speculation. The Upano Valley and Casarabe culture findings are published in peer-reviewed journals, openly available for any researcher in the world to examine and challenge. The Serrania de la Lindosa murals are physically real, formally protected by the Colombian government, and actively being studied, and the honest and ongoing scientific disagreement over exactly how old certain figures are is a normal, healthy part of how real archaeology actually functions, not a weakness in the discovery itself. Taken together, without a single invented detail required to make the story compelling, this amounts to something genuinely rare in modern archaeology. An entire, previously hidden chapter of ancient American history, quite literally sealed away by war and wilderness for generations, finally being opened, read, and actively rewritten in real time, right now, by researchers still walking that same 8 miles of cliff face today. If this made you think differently about how much of ancient human history is still sitting hidden beneath a forest canopy nobody has properly looked beneath yet, that's exactly the point of telling this story honestly, rather than dressing it up with anything invented. The real Amazon, once you strip away the fabricated doomsday vaults and the sealed mystery doors, is already stranger, older, and more genuinely significant than most people ever learned in school, and after 12,000 years it's still only just beginning to be properly read.